You stop texting for one reason, and it's not the reason you've been blaming yourself for. It's not because you weren't enough, not because you said the wrong thing, and not because you failed to be interesting or valuable. It's because the dynamic changed. Attraction didn't vanish overnight. It quietly slipped away when the balance between desire and certainty tipped too far in one direction. Attraction lives in polarity. It grows when two people are moving toward each other, not when one person is running while the other stands still. When a man feels like he already has full access to your time, energy, emotions, and attention, the subconscious question becomes, what is there left to discover? Desire isn't fueled by availability. It's fueled by presence combined with space. When texting becomes constant, predictable, and emotionally heavy, it stops being exciting and starts feeling like responsibility. Here's the truth. Most people never tell you. Men don't stop texting because they don't care. They stop texting when the interaction no longer feels light, inspiring, or purposeful. When messages turn into check-ins, explanations, clarifications, or subtle tests of interest, the energy shifts. Instead of anticipation, there's obligation. Instead of curiosity, there's pressure. And pressure suffocates attraction faster than distance ever could. You see, a man is drawn to a woman who feels like peace, not a problem to manage. When texting becomes a place where he feels he must constantly reassure, respond quickly, or prove something, his nervous system associates communication with stress. Silence then becomes relief. Not because he dislikes you, but because he's escaping the weight of expectation. There's a deeper principle at work here, one rooted in wisdom. What you chase runs, and what you trust comes closer. When you center your worth around someone's response time, you hand them the power to define your value. And the moment your self-worth becomes dependent on their attention, attraction begins to leak away. Confidence isn't loud. It doesn't demand. It doesn't chase. It allows. The most magnetic energy you can bring into any connection is wholeness, a life that feels full even when your phone is silent. Purpose that doesn't pause waiting for a reply. When a man senses that you are grounded, that your happiness is self-sustained, something powerful happens. He leans in, not because he's afraid of losing you, but because he's inspired by you. Silence is not your enemy. Silence is information. It's an invitation to return to yourself, to recalibrate, to stop overgiving and start honoring your own rhythm. The moment you stop trying to control the outcome, you restore the balance. You create space for him to choose, to pursue, to miss you. And here's the divine truth beneath it all. What is meant for you will not require you to abandon your dignity, your peace, or your self-respect. Love that is aligned does not thrive on anxiety. It thrives on mutual desire. When you trust that, when you embody that, you stop fearing silence and start commanding presence. Because the right connection doesn't disappear when you stop chasing. It shows up more clearly. He stopped texting because the emotional balance shifted and pursuit quietly replaced attraction. At the beginning of any connection, there is a natural rhythm. Both people lean in just enough to feel curiosity, but not so much that the mystery disappears. Attraction grows in that space where interest is mutual yet uncertain. The problem begins when that balance tips, when one person starts leaning too far forward emotionally while the other unconsciously leans back to regain equilibrium. Attraction is not built on effort. It is built on energy. When a man feels that he is being pursued emotionally, even subtly, something deep inside him responds by pulling away. This is not cruelty or manipulation. It is human psychology. Desire thrives when it is chosen, not when it is chased. The moment he feels that his presence is needed to regulate your emotions, to provide reassurance, or to validate your worth, the dynamic changes. What once felt exciting now feels heavy. This shift often happens quietly. It doesn't arrive as a dramatic confession or a desperate message. It shows up as responding too quickly every time, rearranging your schedule to be available, over-explaining your feelings, or investing more emotional energy than the connection has earned. None of these actions are wrong in isolation. The issue is when they happen before there is mutual investment. Attraction requires pacing. When the emotional speed increases faster on one side, the other side instinctively slows down. Pursuit kills polarity. Polarity is the tension that creates desire, the feeling that there is something to move toward. When you pursue, you remove that tension. You turn a living, breathing connection into something predictable, and predictability feels safe, but it rarely feels exciting in the early stages of attraction. Safety without challenge leads to complacency. Complacency leads to fading effort. And fading effort often looks like fewer texts, shorter replies, and eventually silence. Here is the part that requires real honesty. Emotional pursuit is often disguised as kindness, openness, or honesty. You may think you are simply being genuine, but beneath it, there may be fear. Fear of losing him, fear of being forgotten, fear that if you don't give more, the connection will disappear. Ironically, that fear becomes the very thing that pushes him away. When your energy says, please choose me, attraction. Here's desperation, not devotion. A man is most attracted when he feels that your interest is a gift, not a demand. When he senses that you are choosing him, not clinging to him. The difference is subtle but powerful. Choosing comes from abundance, clinging comes from lack. One feels light and inspiring, the other feels draining, even if nothing is said outright. When pursuit replaces attraction, texting stops being a place of play and connection and becomes a place of obligation. He no longer texts because he wants to, but because he feels he should. And when something feels like an obligation, avoidance soon follows. Silence becomes a way to reclaim freedom, not a statement about your worth. The most important realization here is this. The moment you stop over-investing, you restore balance. Pulling back is not a game, it is a return to self-respect. It is remembering that your value is not created by effort alone, but by presence, confidence, and emotional independence. When you are rooted in your own life, your own purpose, your own joy, attraction naturally recalibrates. You don't need to chase someone who is meant to meet you halfway. When you allow space instead of filling every gap with effort, you give attraction room to breathe. And often, that space is exactly what reminds him why he leaned in to begin with. Consistency disappears when a man feels certainty without challenge. In the early stages of attraction, what keeps someone engaged is not just interest, but the feeling that there is something unfolding. There is curiosity, a sense of discovery, a reason to show up again and again. When that sense disappears, effort quietly fades. Not because the feeling was fake, but because the emotional journey feels complete before it truly begins. Certainty too early removes momentum. When a man feels that he already knows where he stands, that your availability is guaranteed, that your interest is unwavering regardless of his actions, the subconscious question becomes, what am I working toward? Human beings are wired to move toward what feels earned. When there is nothing left to earn, motivation weakens. Texts that once felt exciting now feel optional. Effort that once felt natural now feels unnecessary. This does not mean you should be distant, cold, or emotionally unavailable. Challenge is not about playing games or withholding affection. It is about maintaining your own standards, your own pace, and your own sense of self. Challenge exists when a man knows that access to your time, energy, and emotional world is a privilege, not a guarantee. When he senses that your life is full and meaningful whether or not he shows up, consistency becomes a choice, not an assumption. Many people mistake consistency as proof of interest, when in reality, consistency is the result of interest being continuously stimulated. Attraction needs movement. When everything is settled too quickly, the dynamic becomes flat. He stops feeling the need to impress, pursue, or invest because the outcome feels already decided. This is why effort often drops right after someone feels secured. The excitement wasn't the person, it was the process. Certainty without challenge often shows up in subtle ways. You might always be available, always agreeable, always understanding. You may lower boundaries to keep the peace or ignore small disappointments to avoid conflict. On the surface, this looks loving. Underneath, it removes friction, And friction is where desire sharpens. Without it, connection becomes comfortable but uninspiring. A man stays consistent when he feels that his actions matter, when he senses that showing up leads to deeper connection and not showing up has consequences, not punishments but natural distance. When effort changes nothing, effort disappears. This is not manipulation, it is cause and effect. Energy responds to energy. Investment responds to value. Challenge is also about self-respect. When you don't chase consistency but expect it, you communicate something powerful without saying a word. You show that you are not dependent on his behavior to feel whole, that you welcome effort, but you do not beg for it. This creates a dynamic where he feels invited to rise, not pressured to stay. When certainty replaces mystery too soon, attraction loses oxygen. Mystery does not mean secrecy, it means depth revealed over time. It means allowing the connection to unfold instead of rushing to secure it. When a man feels there is still more to learn about you, more to experience, more to earn, he stays engaged, he stays curious, he stays consistent. The moment you stop trying to lock things in and start living fully in your own rhythm, the balance shifts. Consistency returns when there is something worth showing up for. Not because you demanded it, but because the connection once again feels alive, dynamic, and worth the effort. Dover availability slowly erodes mystery and desire, even though it often begins with good intentions. In the early stages of attraction, availability feels like interest, and interest feels like safety. You want to show that you care, that you're present, that you're emotionally generous. The problem is not availability itself. The problem is excess availability without boundaries. When someone can reach you at any moment, when your time, energy, and attention are always on standby, the sense of value begins to fade. Desire feeds on anticipation. Anticipation requires space. When there is no space, there is nothing to anticipate. If every message is answered immediately, every call is accepted, every plan is adjusted to fit him, the connection becomes predictable. Predictability feels comfortable, but comfort alone does not sustain attraction. Mystery is not about hiding who you are. It's about allowing layers of you to unfold naturally instead of all at once. Over-availability often comes from a place of wanting to be chosen. You may think that by being easy to access, you're making it easier for the connection to grow. But what actually happens is that the emotional experience becomes diluted. When effort is not required, appreciation weakens. When access is unlimited, it stops feeling special. This is not because you are not special, but because the dynamic no longer reflects it. A man is drawn to a woman who has a life that doesn't pause for him. When he senses that your world is rich, full, and moving forward, his interest intensifies. Over-availability sends the opposite message. It quietly communicates that your time is less valuable than his, that you will rearrange your life to fit into his. Even if this is not what you intend, energy speaks louder than words. Mystery is created when you don't explain everything, when you don't fill every silence, when you don't rush to resolve every emotional gap. Silence can be attractive when it is calm, not anxious. When you are comfortable letting moments breathe, you allow desire to grow in the spaces between interactions. Constant communication removes those spaces, and without them, attraction has nowhere to expand. Over-availability also shifts the emotional responsibility onto you. You become the initiator, the maintainer, the one keeping the connection alive. This imbalance creates fatigue, both for you and for him. For you because you are giving more than you receive. For him because he no longer feels the excitement of pursuit. What once felt like chemistry begins to feel like routine. True confidence is not about being constantly present. It's about being secure, even when why or not. When you don't rush to respond, when you don't feel compelled to prove your interest at every moment, you project emotional stability. This stability is deeply attractive. It signals that you are not driven by fear of loss, but by self-respect and inner fullness. Over-availability doesn't mean you care too much. It means you're giving too much too soon. Attraction requires pacing. When you allow connection to grow step by step, you protect its intensity. You give him the opportunity to lean in, to wonder, to miss you. Missing someone is not a sign of distance, it's a sign of desire being activated. When you reclaim your time, your boundaries, and your rhythm, mystery naturally returns, and with mystery comes renewed interest, curiosity, and attraction. Texting changed from connection to reassurance seeking, and that shift quietly drained the energy that once made it exciting. In the beginning, messages are light, playful, and rooted in curiosity. They're not sent to get something, but to share something. There's no agenda attached. Each text feels like an invitation rather than a test. But over time, when emotional security starts depending on responses, texting stops being a bridge between two lives and starts becoming a lifeline. Reassurance seeking rarely announces itself. It hides behind innocent questions, subtle comments, and emotional check-ins. Did I do something wrong? You seem different lately. Are you okay? On the surface, these sound caring. Underneath, they carry anxiety. They shift the emotional weight of the conversation. Instead of exchanging energy, you're asking him to manage yours. And when communication becomes about soothing fear rather than sharing joy, attraction begins to fade. A man doesn't pull away because he doesn't want to reassure you once or twice. He pulls away when reassurance becomes the primary purpose of communication. When he feels that every message carries an expectation to fix something, confirm something, or prove something, texting becomes emotionally costly. What once felt like connection now feels like pressure. Silence then becomes a form of self-protection, not punishment. Reassurance seeking also collapses polarity. Attraction thrives when two people meet as whole individuals, not when one becomes the emotional anchor for the other. When your sense of calm depends on his replies, you unknowingly give him responsibility over your emotional state. That responsibility can feel heavy even if he cares. Desire does not grow under emotional obligation, it retreats from it. There is also a subtle loss of self in reassurance-based texting. Instead of expressing your truth naturally, you begin tailoring your messages to get a response. You reread texts before sending them, analyze his tone, count the minutes between replies. The focus shifts from presence to performance, and the more you monitor, the less authentic the connection becomes. Attraction requires authenticity, not vigilance. Texting was never meant to carry the weight of emotional security. It's a tool, not a foundation. When it becomes the place where validation is sought, it loses its magic. Conversations feel repetitive, heavy, or tense. He may not be able to articulate why he feels less inclined to text, but his body knows. It associates communication with emotional labor instead of pleasure. The most powerful shift happens when texting returns to its original purpose: sharing, not checking, expressing, not evaluating. When you are emotionally grounded within yourself, your messages naturally feel lighter. They don't demand a response to feel complete. They don't carry urgency. And that ease is deeply attractive. When you stop using texting as a measure of your worth or the relationship's security, you reclaim your power. You no longer need constant confirmation to feel steady. This independence changes the entire dynamic. He senses that you're not reaching out to be rescued from anxiety, but to genuinely connect. And connection, when it's free of pressure, invites presence. Attraction doesn't disappear when reassurance is needed. It disappears when reassurance becomes the currency of communication. When you shift back into self-trust, texting once again becomes a place where desire can breathe. He sensed pressure instead of peace, and that subtle emotional shift changed how being in contact with you felt. In the beginning, communication is effortless. There's ease, curiosity, and a sense that interaction adds something positive to both lives. Messages flow because they feel good, not because they're required. But when unspoken expectations start creeping in, the emotional tone changes. What once felt light begins to feel loaded. Pressure doesn't always come from demands or arguments. More often, it's invisible. It shows up as emotional urgency, as the need for quick replies, as disappointment that's felt rather than stated. It's in the silence that feels tense instead of calm. Even when nothing is said directly, energy communicates. And when the energy says, "I need something from you," the nervous system responds by pulling away. A man is naturally drawn toward environments where he feels relaxed and accepted, not evaluated or managed. When he senses that his words, timing, or level of engagement are being monitored, he feels constrained. Communication stops being an expression of choice and becomes something he must get right. That feeling erodes desire because desire requires freedom. You can't want something you feel forced to maintain. Pressure often grows out of attachment anxiety. The more you care, the more you fear losing the connection. That fear, Kriya, tests hyper-awareness. You notice every change in tone, every delay, every shift in behavior. Without meaning to, you start reacting to these changes. Your messages become slightly heavier, your questions slightly more loaded. He may not consciously recognize why he feels different, but emotionally, he does. Peace is replaced by tension. When communication becomes a place where emotional outcomes are at stake, it stops feeling safe. He may worry that one wrong word will lead to a difficult conversation, emotional fallout, or explanations he doesn't have the energy for. Silence then feels easier than engaging, not because he doesn't care, but because silence carries less risk than saying the wrong thing. Peace is one of the most attractive emotional states you can bring into a connection. Peace says, I'm okay with or without this moment. Pressure says, this moment decides how I feel. The difference is profound. One invites closeness, the other creates distance. When a man feels that being around you allows him to exhale, he naturally wants more of it. When he feels he must brace himself emotionally, he instinctively withdraws. Pressure also shifts the power dynamic. When your emotional state hinges on his behavior, you unknowingly give him control. That imbalance is uncomfortable for both people. True connection thrives on mutual choice, not emotional dependence. The more you regulate your own emotions, the less pressure he feels to regulate them for you. Letting go of pressure does not mean caring less. It means caring without attachment to outcomes. It means allowing the connection to breathe, to evolve naturally, without constant evaluation. When you release the need for things to look a certain way, your energy softens. Communication becomes spacious again. When peace returns, so does attraction. Messages feel easy, conversations feel natural, and contact becomes something he seeks out, not something he avoids. Attraction thrives on space, not constant access, because space is where desire is allowed to grow. In the early stages of connection, what makes interaction exciting is not the volume of communication, but the quality of it. There is room to think, to imagine, to miss. Space creates contrast. It allows each interaction to feel intentional rather than automatic. When access becomes constant, that contrast disappears, and with it, much of the emotional charge. Constant access removes the opportunity for longing. Longing is not painful when it's healthy, it's activating. It reminds someone of what they value. When a man has space from you, he doesn't forget you. He feels you. He processes interactions, replays moments, and looks forward to the next connection. When communication never pauses, there's no chance for that emotional digestion. Everything blends together, and what blends together loses intensity. Many people fear space because they confuse it with disinterest. They believe that if they're not present at all times, the connection will fade. But the opposite is often true. Space does not weaken attraction, it reveals it. If interest is genuine, space strengthens it. If interest is shallow, constant access won't save it anyway. Space simply brings clarity. Attraction requires autonomy. When both people feel free to come and go, to choose interaction rather than be tethered to it, desire stays alive. Constant access can create emotional dependency, where communication becomes habitual rather than heartfelt. Habits are comforting, but they rarely spark passion. Desire needs choice, and choice needs freedom. Space also communicates self-worth. When you don't make yourself constantly available, you signal that your life is full and meaningful. You show that your time is valuable. This doesn't mean playing hard to get or ignoring messages. It means responding when it feels aligned, not out of anxiety or obligation. It means allowing gaps without filling them with explanations or apologies. When access is constant, communication often loses intention. Messages become fillers rather than expressions. What are you doing? Replaces meaningful exchange. Over time, this drains emotional energy. Space resets intention. When you reconnect after space, there's something to share. Conversations feel fresh again. A man leans in when he feels that connecting with you is a choice he wants to make, not something that's always there by default. Space gives him the opportunity to choose. It allows him to initiate, to pursue, to invest. Without space, there is nothing to pursue. Everything is already available. There is also an internal benefit to space. When you're not constantly connected, you stay connected to yourself. You remain grounded in your own emotions, goals, and rhythm. This inner stability is magnetic. It prevents over-attachment and keeps your energy balanced. Attraction thrives when both people are emotionally self-sufficient, not fused. Space does not mean distance of heart. It means respect for individuality. When space is present, interaction becomes intentional, desire becomes active, and attraction remains alive. Silence is often feedback, not rejection, and understanding this changes how you experience it. Most people interpret silence as abandonment, as a verdict on their worth, or as proof that something has gone wrong. But silence rarely speaks about your value. More often, it reflects the state of the dynamic, the emotional environment, or the other person's internal process. When you stop personalizing silence, you start reading it accurately. Silence is information because behavior communicates what words often don't. When someone pulls back, it's not always a conscious decision to disconnect. It's often an instinctive response to something feeling off. That off could be pressure, imbalance, emotional overload, or loss of polarity. Silence becomes a pause, a recalibration. It's the body saying, I need space, not I don't care. When you treat silence as rejection, you react from fear. You chase clarity, demand explanations, or over-communicate to restore security. Ironically, these reactions often confirm the very imbalance that caused the silence in the first place. Silence then grows longer, not because the person wants distance, but because the emotional environment feels unsafe for honest engagement. Feedback is neutral until meaning is assigned to it. Silence simply says something needs adjusting. It invites reflection rather than reaction. When you respond to silence by turning inward instead of outward, you regain your power. You ask not, what's wrong with me? But what is this dynamic showing me? That question leads to growth instead of anxiety. Silence also tests emotional maturity. Can you remain grounded without immediate reassurance? Can you trust yourself when external validation pauses? When you meet silence with calm, you change the dynamic. You show that your emotional stability does not depend on constant contact. This alone can restore attraction because it removes pressure and reintroduces safety. Many people miss the opportunity silence offers. It's a mirror. It reflects patterns of over-giving, over-attaching, or over-analyzing. It highlights where boundaries may have softened or where self-worth may have been outsourced. When you listen instead of panic, silence becomes a teacher. There is also dignity in allowing silence. Not every pause requires a response. Not every shift needs immediate fixing. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is nothing. This is not passive, it's intentional restraint. It communicates confidence, self-respect, and trust in the natural unfolding of connection. Silence separates those who seek control from those who trust alignment. When you stop trying to force outcomes, you create space for authenticity. Either the connection calibrates naturally or it reveals its limits. Both outcomes serve you. Clarity is kinder than false closeness. Silence is not the end of communication, it's part of it. When you learn to hear what silence is telling you, you stop fearing it. And when fear leaves, so does the need to chase. Thank you for giving your time and energy to this message. May it remind you of your worth and inner power. Until next time, stay grounded, stay confident, and never forget who you are.